Choosing a target for protest is an incredibly important decision within the mobilization process and within attempts to make change from broader society. Uh, Choosing a target can be often as simple as identifying the group that's responsible for the problem, or identifying a group that has the capacity to help you address the problem that you're interested in solving. But there are additional factors to consider when choosing a target, because identifying a good target can help you crystallize your interest in your goals, as well as how that target is not meeting those interests or is not fitting with those goals. So who you should target can be driven by what your goals are. Are you interested in changing public opinion? Are you interested in getting your group's identity recognized more broadly? Or are you interested in creating some sort of city, state, or federal policy changes more broadly? And you should also consider who you're able to pressure. So you think about the representatives that you have access to and that you're voting for, as well as the companies that you shop at and buy from, or the schools that you attend. And think about the relative strengths and weaknesses and vulnerabilities of these groups and how you can use those to your advantage to create change. And one of the most common targets of protest are governments. And if we think about the government as being broken down into city governments, state governments, and federal governments. And because representatives need to be elected, we often have a lot of ability to influence these groups and put pressure on these groups. And it's worthwhile thinking about who you have the ability to put the most pressure on. So for instance, if you're an environmental group, you may not have the best ability to put pressure on federal or state governments right now, but you may be able to work with your city government in terms of creating bike lanes, working on recycling, or cleaning up environmental problems within your own community, and then scaling up those efforts from there to city and federal policies. And it's important to remember that governments can create very broad sweeping changes within society. But because they're often negotiating across multiple different interest groups, that change can often be slow if it occurs at all. And so there has to be some degree of patience and persistence that comes with working and addressing and targeting governments. Another target is corporations, where unlike governments, we have much less influence on how corporations operate unless we happen to be board members or stockholders, which most of us really aren't. But we do have influence in the sense that we buy goods from corporations, we solicit services from corporations, and they need us to continue to do that, to continue to be viable. And corporations also have to worry about their status within society more broadly. And research has shown that boycotts and strikes, which often have a negative effect on the reputation of those companies, can have a negative effect on the bottom line of companies, affecting stock prices more broadly. And so corporations may be a useful target to create change within society. And some companies that have been repeatedly targeted by protests, such as Nike or Starbucks or Procter & Gamble, have dedicated components of their businesses that are created to deal with protest and protest demands. And so it may be useful to do some research on the corporations you're thinking about targeting and using that information to your advantage. But it's also important to remember that corporations are very defensive when it comes to protest and boycotts. And so while in the short term, you may not see a large amount of success, your activity may create open doors or create opportunities for yourself in the future or for others that come along and protest these organizations and corporations later on. In addition to governments and corporations, schools and universities can often be a target of protest as well. Schools have historically been a target of protest. You think about the free speech movement in the 1960s, but you can also think about more contemporary protests like movements that are trying to get environmental sustainability practices on campus or address sexual assault policies on campus. And like corporations, schools and universities are not as open to influence because, again, we're not on boards or donating money, but schools are concerned about who attends and their willingness to attend. And schools are particularly mindful of their status in communities and in society more broadly. And in this way, schools can be a really useful target, not just for students, but also for non-students as well. And you can think about the example of in Chicago, protesters are calling for a trauma center on the South Side, use the University of Chicago as a target to successfully advocate for the development of a trauma center in that area. In some instances, we may be interested in targeting groups or institutions that are less vulnerable to protest or that we have less influence on. So, for instance, federal governments like Sudan or South Africa, or companies that we don't buy products directly from, like Sodexo or Blackwater. And in these instances, it may be useful to identify a proxy target. And what a proxy target is groups or organizations that do not have a direct effect or influence on the issue that we're concerned about, but they are able to put pressure on groups or institutions that do. So, for instance, in the 1980s, students who were protesting the apartheid government in South Africa targeted their schools and universities, trying to get them to stop investing money in the South African government. Climate change protesters are currently using similar tactics, trying to get their schools and universities to divest from coal, oil, and gas companies more broadly. And so these are just a number of different targets that we can look at. You can also target public opinion, cultural practices, medical experts or medical institutions. But no matter who we're targeting, it's always important to think about the goals that we want to accomplish. Think about how the goals that we want to accomplish are connected to the targets that we identify, and also think about what the strengths and weaknesses of those targets are and how we can use our own position and standing in society to put pressure on those individuals for creating change in society more broadly. Good luck.